when we talk about the chloride pollution, you might hear it called a salt pollution, you might hear it called a chloride pollution. We use them interchangeably. This chloride, well, water is basically a universal solvent, so anything that dumps into our fresh water can be broken down, be dissolved. When these chemicals reach water, they dissolve, but the chloride stays with the water molecule and flows wherever it goes. That's why we're seeing the chloride stick within our lakes, our rivers, and even our groundwater and cause problems. Where does it come from? There are sort of three main places that we're getting chloride from. The first one you may have heard about. It's the road salt. It's the salt we put on our roads, our parking lots, our sidewalks. It washes off during, spring rains. It can flow off during snow melt. It can blow off during windstorms. Just especially the granules, they kind of bounce and move anywhere. So it's ending up in our waters by flowing through our storm drains, any of our impervious surfaces. Our water softeners is a newer one that Minnesota State's really trying to tackle. We've been on the road salt case for a couple decades now, so we are making improvements. Water softeners is a little bit more challenging, and we are recognizing more and more what an impact our water softeners come from, and we'll kind of talk about that. And then the last one is fertilizers, manure, dust suppressants. Dust suppressants are a very, very small portion. Like they just spray stuff down on dusty roads to keep it from getting dusty. So that's a small part. These two are really the main ones. But if you do live in a more agricultural area, this one tends to play a bigger role. Specifically in Hennepin County. So you can go into this smart salting tool on the state and you can take a look at specific counties and it'll tell you exactly where your chlorides are coming from. And you can see our fertilizer use for Hennepin County and our dust suppressant use are really, really, really small. Our winter maintenance has gotten a lot less. So this is an annual look, which is still a ton. We're looking at, 39,000 tons of salt that we're putting on our surfaces annually for our winter maintenance. Winter maintenance is the de-icing. But then now we're getting that a little bit more under control. We have this whole water softening issue to deal with. So about 75% of Minnesotans get their drinking water from groundwater, from really, really deep aquifers. And the water softening is used to remove things like calcium and magnesium that otherwise kind of gum up our appliances and sometimes give it a weird taste and leave scale in our teapots. Whoopsies. Going back. So one of the things about chloride pollution is after it washes into our lakes and rivers, it is a permanent pollutant. We cannot get rid of it. And it only takes 1 teaspoon to pollute about a 5-gallon bucket of water, like forever. With other pollutants, bacteria, nutrients, sediment, there are things that we can do. They're really expensive, but we can still do them. Chloride is one of those ones that unless you take the entire lake and reverse osmosis it, which would kill all the phytoplankton and everything else living in there anyway, you cannot get it out. And so our only option is really to use less. So taking a look at kind of where we are in Minnesota today, this is just I kind of zoomed in on the metro area, but this is a map that looks at how many streams and lakes are what we call impaired. So impaired means that for any pollutant, in this case chloride, we've crossed the state standard, which is about 230 milligrams per liter if you're interested. So the lake has crossed that state standard, and that's been the standard that's identified to impact aquatic life, recreation, swimming, that kind of stuff. And so when we're looking at our state as a whole, we have 68 lakes and streams, and the streams aren't full streams, they're like segments of streams that you'll see. We call them stream reaches, but they have 68 of them that are impaired already, and this is a jump from just I think 2 or 3 years ago when it was at 54. So a huge jump, and that could be more actually impaired, that could be more people are monitoring. We never totally know, but either way we're seeing an increase, and then we have 75 more that are at risk, and that means those water bodies are just under that threshold and they're just kind of hanging out. They haven't quite crossed over yet, but they're at risk. They have really high levels of salt. So close to us we have 9 Mile Creek, Shingle Creek, Bassett Creek. I tried to zoom in a little bit because I was trying to look at it. I think Parker's Lake up in Plymouth, nothing right in the Hopkins area other than Minnehaha Creek right here. And then some of the like Bidemakaska I think is impaired. So getting into like, why is it a problem? Why should we care? There's a whole world of why it's a problem. I'm going to try to condense it into like 4 points. One is it affects our wildlife. Our wildlife, our aquatic wildlife, they're not adapted to chloride. They don't live in the ocean. They live in fresh water. And so when we get too much chloride in the water, it affects them at a cellular level. Like their cells end up putting more water out than they are taking in, trying to deal with the chloride, and they get essentially dried out, dehydrated. It's like drinking seawater for them. And so it affects them all across the board. Some interesting ones like with amphibians or frogs, it dries out their eggs, and so they can't reproduce. Or they try, but then the eggs kind of shrivel up and die. It affects our dragonfly larvae. If you don't know, dragonflies actually start their lives in the water, and they live there for like 2 years as these kind of spidery little creatures, and then they emerge as the beautiful dragonflies that we have today. But it affects the immune response in our dragonfly larvae. And then with fish, we're seeing impacts in kind of the physiology, the reproduction, and just the kind of overall health of our fish. So it's impacting our wildlife. We're seeing changes in their ability to reproduce. The infrastructure one is really interesting. So according to the Environmental Protection Agency, they estimate that for every $50 of salt applied, we are seeing $750 in damages. So we know like salt's corrosive, right? It affects our metals, it affects our cement, it affects our asphalt. You see it in the cracks, you see it in the rust in your cars. You probably even see it on like your boots and stuff if you're getting like the scale. It's a corrosive component. And we're seeing damages in our infrastructure. So every time we put it down, we can see those damages. It's particularly concerning like in areas where we have bridges. We don't want the infrastructure damaged. Not that we want it damaged anywhere. And they're saying it's costing us probably 3.5 to 7 billion a year just from chloride damages. And then over here, it affects our soil and our plants. Plants will take up chloride just like anything else, and they'll store it in their leaves, and eventually those leaves will kind of brown and die off. It can lead to the death of a plant. It affects our soil and our soil nutrients. When you get too much chloride along the soil and the roadsides, the soil can't hold on to the water as much, and it can't hold on to nutrients much, both of what it needs to have a good, healthy soil structure. And then there are other species like buckthorn that do really, really well in salty soils. And so you're trading kind of our natural, lovely vegetation that doesn't want the chloride with, making a lovely habitat for buckthorn, which I'm sure we're all trying to get rid of still. And then this is one that's really interesting. Not as many people are familiar with this. Our lakes in Minnesota, most of them, undergo what is called a mixing or an overturn. This happens in the spring and it happens in the fall. It has to do with lake stratification and getting into layers and temperature. I won't go into that, but what you need to know is that when this happens in the fall and the spring, the lakes are kind of even temperature all the way through. And what that does is it sort of rejuvenates the lake, and it brings oxygen and nutrients from the top to the bottom, which otherwise is sort of devoid of those things, particularly in the winter, it just kind of sits there. And so really important process. But if you've ever heard when you go to the ocean, you're actually lighter and you float in the ocean a little bit more. That's because salt water is more dense, it's heavier. And so in our Minnesota lakes, what we're starting to see is the salt water that's washing into these lakes sink to the bottom and stay there. And so we can't get this mixing. It's not allowing that full mixing of the lake, and we're not allowing that nutrients and that oxygen to get down to the bottom of the lake. We are creating our own dead zones in the very bottom of our lakes by having this chloride pollution in there. So that's a fun one. And the last one is just groundwater. Now, I want to preface this by saying none of our drinking water sources currently have high levels of chloride in them. You see the quote on shallow wells. Most of our aquifers where we get our drinking water are hundreds of feet below the surface, like 600, 800 feet below the surface. In a 2022 study, they did start to look at those aquifers, and they did see higher levels of chloride than they traditionally saw. So they're seeing it go up, but it's more of like a cause for concern. It hasn't flipped over. Our groundwater is not at risk impaired yet, but they're seeing the trend that if we don't stop putting or using salt in excess, we could affect our actual drinking water aquifers. What they did find in a study in 2016 is the shallow aquifers, which are they're, as you would expect, they're shallower, 10, 20, 100 feet. And they saw 30% of those that they monitored had way too much chloride above what the EPA drinking standard is, which is about 20 milligrams per liter. So we saw it in our shallow wells. We haven't seen it in our deep wells, but we are mindful of that and watching that. So the entire message is that salt is a permanent, it's an invisible pollutant, and we're overusing it. So we need our salt. The whole presentation isn't to say that salt is evil and that we, shouldn't be safe and we shouldn't use it, but oftentimes we are using it too much. And more salt doesn't mean more safety. It doesn't mean more melting. They have the equations down for how much to use that actually makes a difference and works. And we as people just tend to go above and beyond with it, to the point that we are seeing all of that excess stay here. And another kind of fun fact, it's not in the presentation, but the U of M did a study, and they found out that 78% of the chloride that is being put in the Twin Cities metro area is staying in the Twin Cities metro area, meaning it's not getting flushed through the Mississippi River. It's staying here and it's getting into our local waterways. Now with road salt, that's just specifically road salt. Water softeners tend to go through wastewater treatment plants. They get flushed through like the Mississippi River and off down to the Gulf of Mexico. But it's our road salt that tends to stay here and actually impact the local lakes and rivers. So what can we do? That's the fun part of the presentation. We need to use less. We need to use less. We need to use it where it's needed, when it's needed, and just in the amount that it's needed. And there are some ways that we can do this. The state's been working on this through education, training, and legislation. There is actually a Minnesota state chloride plan. And so they have been tackling that. That plan's been around for, I think, 10 years. And there's one person at the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency that manages that, and then hundreds of others that work to make it happen. So I'll go over a little bit of what you guys can do to help. And then I might touch on just some of the legislation and the trainings that happen so that you are aware of them should you want to support them or hire small salters. So things you can do, we're gonna go over some practices. I have a volunteer opportunity. We'll talk about the legislature, and then we'll talk about the trainings that the state offers. There are basically 4 actions that we as just residents, regular citizens can do in our everydays. They're on this little card. I have all my little handouts over there because again, this is way too much to cover in a presentation. So I have take-homes. So if you ever need to be reminded, these are the 4 things. We'll kind of talk about it. But shovel, select, scatter, and sweep. Shovel. This is my favorite one. They say shovel first, shovel often. If you get the snow off the sidewalk, there's nothing there to get pressed down and actually turn into ice. So that is first and foremost everything that they do. They say get out there, shovel, clear it off. If you get the tricky spots, if you get, a place, maybe you have like a gutter that drains, or it's just a place where stuff pools and you get the ice, then that's when you're using the salt. That's when you're trying to get it melted. And a key with that, when you are spreading the salt, is you're not trying to use the salt to melt the ice. You're trying to use the salt to loosen the ice. So what you want is that you want it to kind of, I've actually seen this happen. So you put the salt on it, there's a magnesium chloride one, and I watched the salt crystals just dissolve into the ice. And then you took a chipper and just chipped it right away. So you want the salt to loosen the ice so you can remove it, not actually just melt it. So shovel first. The second one is selecting. Regular salt, that sodium chloride, that first one I showed you, it doesn't really work after about lower than 15 degrees Fahrenheit. So you get those super cold days, that's not really going to do anything. It's basically ineffective. There are different products, and that's what this brochure has. It has all the products on the back. There's different products that work at different temperatures. So like calcium chloride, they're going to use that at like -20. Magnesium chloride is another kind of common one. That'll work at about 5 degrees and up. And then this is our sodium chloride at 15 degrees and up. And they basically say anything lower than that, you're better at using what we call abrasives. So that's your sand, your kitty litter. My parents used something like ground up cherry stones. They found, yeah, I don't remember where they found it, but they would use, they were chunkier than like kitty litter. They were like almost like little rocks, and they would use that because they had a really awful patch right in front of their driveway. So there's different things you can use, but if it's not melting, if it's too cold to melt, you're better using some sort of abrasive. And it can be tricky to, the labels are not great, we'll get into that, but that's why you kind of have to follow these and look for what you're looking at, and that's why this guide is really, really helpful, because this tells you kind of what it is. Yes?
Is it better to just use sand, period?
So we had, yes and no. For small spots and for like a tricky area, sand can be better, but we wouldn't want the whole of the cities to switch over to sand, because then we end up with sediment pollution in our waters.
Okay.
So there's that like trade-off.
Gotcha.
Where it's kind of like tricky. Best would be everyone just put snow tires on like they do in Sweden and not have to go to Target during a blizzard.
Yeah. It's all connected.
It is all connected. So this is just a heads up that there are no regulations when it comes to this. So they can put whatever they want on their bag as far as marketing. If it says pet safe, if you check the label and it's magnesium chloride, that's not pet safe. Like if they eat that, that's poison. It's going to hurt their paws if it gets licked. If it's environmentally safe and it has, a chloride in there, it's not environmentally safe. So just be mindful that there is sort of a greenwashing even in the salt world where they're saying, hey, these things are fine. They're probably not fine. We can't really tell you whether they are fine or whether they aren't fine because there aren't any regulations associated. So it's more just a heads up to be mindful that if you are purchasing products, to try to check what those labels are and follow guidelines. Yeah, that always drives me nuts. I'm like, it's pet friendly. I was like, it's not pet friendly. Third one, scattering. So these are actually from my work. We're still working with my facilities department. Bane of my existence. When you are scattering the salt, you can probably barely see it here, but these are just little individual salt crystals right here. You want them about 3 inches apart. You don't want them all cluttered together. Again, more salt does not equal more melting. You only need them about 3 inches apart in order for them to do the job that they are there to do. So like this kind of stuff where it's pooled, this kind of stuff where it's just like scattered all over the place, like that's just it's an excessive use and waste of salt that's only going to wash away into a water body. So scatter is really important, just spreading it out and allowing it to do its work. And the last one, this is one of my other favorite ones. If you see salt on the pavement and it's dry, bare pavement, it's not doing any work. It's not there for any reason anymore. So the best thing you can do is sweep it up. And it's okay if you sweep it up and it gets a little bit of sand and gunk and fuzzies and twigs in there. You can put it in a bucket and you can just reuse it when you need to. So this is absolutely the first one of the shoveling, get it off, and the second one of the sweeping up when you're done. Those are my favorite tips that I really encourage people to follow because those are the two that really make the most difference when you're trying to preserve it. Okay, water softeners. If you remember that first slide, you'll remember that Hennepin County's chloride pollution is a lot coming from those water softeners. And again, those are the ones that are going to go through a wastewater treatment plant. Our wastewater treatment plants weren't designed to remove chloride. They were designed to move bacteria, some nutrients, sediments, solids, but they're not designed to remove solids. So it just goes straight through the water treatment facility and into a water body, most often the Mississippi. Problem is, I can't in a presentation tell you how to fix your water softener. I don't even know it. The technology is way beyond me. So I will tell you what I do know, and then I have a couple like tip sheets. One of them is they say if you have an on-demand water softener. So there's timed water softeners, which like they go off at like 3 a.m. every night and they soften your water. Those will use more salt than an on-demand water softener, which just treats the water as you're sort of using it. So if you are making a new purchase, it's best to use an on-demand water softener. But then there are things like, I don't even know, they're called like efficiency ratings and hardness ratings and all these things, and I can't even begin to tell you what they are. But there are tips. This one is from Madison, the city of Madison, northern Wisconsin, is dealing with a fair amount of salt. Actually, they do have a drinking water well that is, it was at like 75 milligrams per liter, 73, I think, and the EPA standard is 20. So way up there. So Madison is dealing with worse stuff than we are right now. And so they have this whole like water softener guideline. They got a lot of other resources. So I printed this out, and I printed one out that I made for my work. If you're interested, you can kind of read through the tips. If you have someone you work with, you can talk to them and say, hey, I want to make sure that I'm using only what I need to use. I want my highest, what they call efficiency rating. But sometimes the people you get don't know what that means. So my future hope is that the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency is, in theory, making a webinar for residents on how to deal with water softeners. So there is something coming down the line, but we're just not there yet. So water softeners are tricky. I don't even know if mine's set the right way. As far as a volunteer opportunity, if you're looking for a service or a service learning opportunity, there's a program called Salt Watch. This is a national program. It's by the Isaac Walton League of America. And its whole goal is to sort of figure out, what the chloride levels are in water bodies across the United States. So we have an active program in Minnesota. Gethsemane here is a 9 Mile Creek, and 9 Mile Creek has an active program. But you can basically go online. They have a little QR code, and they have a website, and basically sign up to do it. You don't have to be part of a program. You can just sign up. They send you this cute little kit. It comes in a tiny little envelope. It's not even a big thing. And it's got 4 different test strips, these little test strips right here. And you go in and you can do snow melts. You could check the water like coming off your driveway. If you have a stormwater pond that you can access safely, you could go check the stormwater pond. If you have a creek near your house, you can go check the creek. And they just encourage people to do this throughout the winter to get different levels of chloride throughout the winter, and it all goes into this huge database. And then people like myself that work in water can access the database and be like, okay, where are the hot spots? Like where do I see problems where we should start to, talk to the businesses or talk to the residents or something like that. So it's a quick and easy kind of fun program to do. And I have a brochure on that if you are interested.
Madeline,
Yes.
just, at the beginning you were kind of telling us that, the water softeners seem to be the big thing. So in your division or in pollution control, is there anybody like looking at, is there a way to change the type of salt that are water softeners to make it?
Yes.
That's in the work, if somebody's working, to me that would be something of these multiple steps.
Yes. So a couple different answers to your question. I'm trying to remember which city it is now. There are some cities that have taken over the softening of water. So like all of our water goes through a water treatment facility for our city, and they, take things out and they put things in and they send it off to our faucets. So some cities are taking over this water softening aspect and doing it on a broader scale, and then offering rebates to people to get rid of their water softeners. That helps hugely because then the city can control it and give it only what it's needed, and we're not relying on all of us who don't have the technical knowledge to kind of figure it out. So that's one way they're trying to tackle it. Another way, there are water softeners that don't use chlorides to remove the hardness. I don't know much about them. I do know that there's one lady, her name is Connie Fortin. She has been leading chloride pollution prevention in Minnesota for probably 30 years. And so she had a water softener installed that didn't use the chloride. And she's like, I just know too much. I can't have a water softener that uses chloride. So she got this new one installed. I can't remember how it works. I don't remember if it's electrical or something like that. It's really out of my territory. But I remember it didn't work as well as she even wanted it to. And so for her, she's going, okay, well, the technology's not quite there to remove the hardness without using the chemical components now. There is sort of a perspective that we could encourage people to adapt to the hardness a little bit more, but then you get the appliance issues because you don't want your appliances filling up with scale and having to buy like a new dishwasher every 3 to 4 years because of that. So it's a tough trade-off. I think the goal is really to use the right amount to make sure we're not using more than we need to. And I love the idea of the cities taking it over so they can deal with it and we don't have to as much. And then it's in the very beginning, but wastewater treatment plants are looking at, okay, what can my role be and how could we help? Are there ways that we can remove the chloride on the final side as it comes to us? So kind of a 3-part way that we're trying to deal with water softeners. Like I said, we've gotten roads kind of figured out, but the water softeners, even when I went on that site and I downloaded that chart, I was surprised because I didn't realize that the numbers for Hennepin County and water softening would be that high. I still, in my brain, kind of had roads as the highest one. So I think part of that is just us understanding the impact that they're starting to have. But yeah, that's a tough one. This is more a heads up to any of you that hire people to do stuff. So whether it's your own house and you hire like a landscape removal company to do plowing, or whether it's an organization where you're hiring someone to clear like a whole parking lot, there are statewide trainings. And this is why road salt has gone down, is because we've had these trainings for 15 years. And we train snowplow drivers and landscapers that are doing parking lot and sidewalks. And we train property managers, people who are just managing apartment buildings or schools. And all of those trainings give a much longer 4-hour training on chloride and what are the best steps to take to prevent it or prevent the pollution and how to use the right amount. So these trainings exist. Where's the website? There is a website down here and it says like, how do you hire a certified person? So you can go online, you can see if the person you hire is certified, or you can find people in your area that are certified and they've gone through these trainings. And they have to go through them, I think, every 3 to 5 years, so they get refreshed. I think that is all I had. I just wanted to acknowledge that I took a lot of information from these 3 organizations. There's the Pollution Control Agency, which is basically like our local environmental protection agency. They're the arm of the EPA in Minnesota. And then Salt Watch, which you heard about, that's a nonprofit that's goal is to protect lakes and rivers. And then Low Salt, No Salt is a new, it's not really an organization, it's a partnership of cities, counties, watershed districts, state agencies that are all trying to, actually had one of those, where did that go? I'll find it and put it out. I had a really good tip sheet from the Low Salt, No Salt that has even more steps that you can take as homeowners. And their whole goal is really just to educate people and get people and organizations to use less. So that is all I had. Yes.
This, I noticed more recently that they put down a solution on streets now.
Ryan.
And so is that still some chloride and how does it compare?
Yeah, so a lot of the times, if you guys have seen the white stripes going down the streets, that's a brine solution. It's really grown in the last few years. Minnetonka was doing it. I'm sure Hopkins does it by now. So they go out and they spray those lines on there before a storm, and it prevents the bond. So that's a prevention strategy. So it prevents that ice bond from even forming, makes it much easier for the plows to come through and get it off. And then in theory, they don't have to use the salt, the pellet salt as much. The nice thing about brine is it stays in place. So it's not bouncing off, scattering with the wind and the rain and the snow. It also uses 75% less chloride. So as a dissolved solution, we're not seeing nearly the pollution results from using that brine. So yes, they do use it. I would like to see more cities using it. It's growing, One of the hangups is just the cost to getting a brine solution in a tank and a place to store it, but the state actually has grants that help out with that. So we're seeing more of an increase in that area as well. But yeah, brine is
Still
awesome.
has chloride.
It does still have chloride.
Yeah.
They've dabbled in, so like where I worked in Chaska, we had the Gedney pickle factory. And so they actually tried using pickle brine for a while, but all the chunks of like the onions and stuff gunked up the so that didn't last long. And then they've tried beet juice, but then we have like, beet juice it's got a lot of what we call organic components, which is in a water body that leads to nutrients, that leads to algae. So we've tried these alternatives, and some people still use them in small doses, but they all sort of have their own issues. It's kind of like pick your lesser evil type of thing.
They advertise these salt-free softeners,
Yes,
and they're about twice as expensive.
I believe that.
But I thought they worked. What's that television one? Get your own, what is the?
Connecticut.
Connecticut.
Oh.
And that, you're telling me that does not work as well as the salt?
All I know is that Connie was less than impressed with it, but could not use a traditional water softener because of her history of fighting.
Because I thought they worked as
Right.
well, they're just more expensive to purchase.
I'm sure they're more expensive. I honestly, water softeners is just, I don't know anything. I don't even set my own, like, I have no idea about those things.
But
I
it's
can-
probably getting better all the time, so maybe
Yeah.
it's worth looking into.
Yeah, but when they advertised, they said it's the softest, so the neighbors come over and use it. It's better than what they have, but I always thought they worked, but yeah, they're more expensive to put in.
It'd be interesting if they had testimonies on their website. I always like testimonies,
Yeah,
and see what, people were saying. But yeah, I'm with you, Eiley. I think that technology is going to continue to improve, and we'll see different ways to remove that hardness.
I wonder too if there'd be like Consumer Reports that compares different
yeah.
products, because maybe that would be a way to see if it really works.
I'm also wondering, so I live in a more than 100-year-old house.
Mhm.
Our pipes are, we have lead pipes.
Yeah.
Instantly, and there's a lot of buildup over the years. So what I'm wondering is there a way to flush the plumbing every so often to clear sediment without consistently using salt?
Ooh,
Interesting.
I don't know.
But if they're
Yeah.
lead pipes too, maybe you don't want.
I gotta get them replaced. It's a whole project. That's a whole thing. But pipes in general, it
Yeah.
builds up
It
in
does.
any kind of pipes, any kind of plumbing.
And you have to get them flushed out?
Well, what I'm wondering is there a way to flush plumbing instead of using salt and
I
instead
get
of
it.
using
Okay.
softeners?
Ooh, I don't know. I
Still
wish
in
my
your
husband
water,
were here.
though. It's still in your water, whether it's
Yeah.
in the pipes or not, right?
Right. So that's why I'm wondering, is there a way
To keep it from.
to
To keep it from building up.
to
I
keep
don't
that
know.
from building up without using the softeners to keep it
Mhm.
from building up? And
I have not heard of one.
well, can you ask your bosses?
I can ask my husband. He's going to know more than my bosses.
Uh-huh. Can you
I-
have him talk to me, and we will make a plan for the state of Minnesota and the whole of the United States?
Matt worked as a plumber for a number of years, but I don't.
Okay, I need to call him anyway then.
Yeah. Yes.
I had a question. Well, does that Connecticut talk about reverse osmosis, and what is that?
Oh, it's another techie question. Reverse osmosis basically removes everything from the water, so you have nothing but pure H2O.
And that's
water. People will
available.
use it in, I know a number of people that use it out in western Carver County where they have concerns of contamination from, say, manure or nitrates, manganese. Those are all common groundwater pollutants that the Minnesota Department of Health recommends not having in your water. And so they'll use reverse osmosis systems. They're pretty spendy, but I do believe, they do remove chloride because they remove everything.
And
I
then
know, but also
waste a
looking
lot
at
of water
fluoride
in the
though too, right?
process.
Yeah, good for it. I think it's
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's a viable solution for a lot
I
of
feel like the
things.
solution is to like,
The next question I had is, okay, you do have property managers underneath. That was my business for years, and I know why they just throw it down, the same thing at
Ah.
the health club,
Yes.
slip and fall. You are being sued left and right all
Yeah.
winter long, because,
Yes.
oh, I slipped there, well, look. I just, then they would say, oh, well, you didn't, your people weren't out there in time, and so it's just this.
Thank you. I actually forgot to cover that.
No,
There's a huge liability piece.
that's a,
And there's a really awesome piece of legislature that's been going through Minnesota for 4 or 5 years now. They've tried 3 times, I think, to get it passed. And it would help with that. It models a piece of legislature from New Hampshire. And basically what the legislation says is that if someone were to go through the smart salt training, they go through the smart salt training, the training's put on by the state, they're on a list, they have to document how much they use. So, you take pictures and you write, oh, I put, 3 pounds down here, blah, blah, blah. So you have records, go through the training, you keep records. You are now protected from being sued. You are protected from liability. So it's a limited liability piece of legislation that's passed in New Hampshire, and it's proven really helpful for exactly that reason. Because you have people coming in and they're like, well, I fell and you didn't put salt down. And then the property manager's gonna be like, yes, I did. And here's all my data, and I went through the training. And then the state says they followed the guidelines. You can't sue them. That was the proper use. But it hasn't passed.
Yeah.
I don't remember if it was the House or the Senate in Minnesota, but it has not fully passed.
because even here on the steps, it's like, it's a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And sure, they slipped and fell, but so, come on, it's Minnesota, it's winter, but no, they insurance companies, and
Yes.
that's it, right? Just like all of this.
all the intersecting.
And that's a huge driver because people will use it because people want to see it. They want to feel the crunch because that's when they feel safe. And yeah, it's a.
Yeah, but it's like all the whole front is just all salt.
Uh-huh.
Oh man, they need to do something.
And if it's bare pavement, then it's not doing anything. And they say don't use it as a prevention. Don't put it down before. It's supposed to be a de-icer.
It was
Not
it was
before.
as a de-icing.
Yeah.
And then one other question is the salt or the CL content of these products, like the Pet Safe one.
Yeah.
Is there any legislation going through to be more transparent or
Not that I know of.
labeling?
Yeah, I'm not aware of any.
That would be nice.
Probably not. It would be nice.
Speaking of all things.
Write it.
Honestly, probably have to go through the
Right.
FDA.
Yeah. Probably.
Because it's all across state lines.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and just because FDA handles a lot of weird
No,
stuff like that.
Everybody's getting response.
Toss that way.
When you were
If
talking
you
about
get
your
freezing
friends.
rain, shoveling doesn't do you any good. Right?
No, that is one where it doesn't do you any good. That a brine can help, but a lot of homeowners don't use a brine. Freezing rain is rough, and with the changes we're seeing in like weather and precipitation patterns, with getting warmer and wetter, we're seeing a lot more freezing rain. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's last year was fun for that.
There's a product like that, like that's available.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Nine Mile Creek Watershed used to say, I think if you wanted to make your own brine, it was like 2 cups of hot water to 1 cup of salt. But then they sort of took that off their website and off their publications. I don't really know why. So I don't know if they're like trying not to have people do. I mean, a cup of salt to 2 cups of hot water. That sounded really strong to me, but so maybe they didn't have it right.
I would see why the lakes would keep this chlorine and have it get worse and worse. But why would the rivers, if you mark, why would they just leak it out.
They do. It flushes out.
It flushes out.
But they're listed as impaired because what we're seeing is just high levels continuously in that
Even
stretch.
though it's flushing out to the Mississippi or whatever, they're still getting a lot in.
Mm-hmm. So there's some source that's coming into that particular stretch of the river.
And also it goes, I mean, when it goes through the Mississippi, then it goes down to the Gulf of Mexico, and that shifts the ecosystem of the ocean as well, right?
Yeah, we already got a dead zone down there.
Yeah,
Really?
So-
I thought the oceans would love the salt.
well, they have enough.
They don't need it saltier.
Now I'm curious what the salt content of the ocean is, like milligrams per liter.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to look that up. How it
Of each
compares to
one?
what ours are doing. 'Cause-
Well, and it'd be really fascinating to look at like the salt content in like northern Europe
Mhm.
and in the Arctic and Antarctic area, like those
Yeah.
ocean areas, and compare to
The different.
highly populated,
Yeah, see where it's at.
just to see.
Yeah, I know, I'm curious now.
One question I have is like, sometimes in our neighborhood, I'll see like the dump truck must have left accidentally a pile of salt,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Mhm.
And sometimes it's at a busy intersection,
Yeah,
so it doesn't really feel
their
practical
spinners
to,
keep
like,
going.
you know, to like go clean it up, but do you think it's worth it to call the city?
Yes.
Okay.
They, I haven't done this personally, although I've thought about it. But in this campaign, the low salt, no salt, one of their recommendations is if you do see that, like a pile somewhere, is to call the local county, city, whatever road it is, and make them go clean it up. Yeah. So I'm gonna do that in Minnetonka. Minnetonka should be better. They were better, and then that Wednesday snowstorm, what was it, not last one, 2 Wednesdays ago, when the roads were like ice skating rinks? They went over like all through my neighborhood, and I have chunks of salt this big, I kid you not. And I'm going, Minnetonka was trained. I know they were trained because I lived there and I tracked it. And I don't know what happened, but I think I'm gonna call them and be like, guys, like this is not okay. Because it's just chunks everywhere. It looks like that one picture I showed you by the curb where it was just like a pile of it.
Yeah, and some people have these